This week on The Wheelhouse. Primary Day 23. Winners and losers, and what it means for you and I. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. It's a show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. A new face in Hartford, a close race in Bridgeport, a vote chase among Derby Republicans. Connecticut voters, they went to the polls yesterday in support of primary candidates. At least one of the primaries isn't over yet. Yes, there's going to be a recount in Derby. But in Hartford, Arunan Arulampalam is set to be mayor in a city that is heavily Democrat. And in New Haven, it looks like Justin Elicker has snatched a third term as mayor.
Because we have worked, not just today, but for the past 4 years together, we have accomplished so much. We have persevered, and we should be proud in New Haven about how we have persevered.
Thank you to Camila Vallejo. She came back to Connecticut Public for a night to cover Justin Elicker at Bar Restaurant in downtown New Haven. She got that sound. We're going to get context on that clip of Elicker talking and the state of politics in New Haven now. It's the first guest of today's post-primary wrap on The Wheelhouse. Here's Thomas Breen. He's the managing editor of the New Haven Independent. Good morning, Thomas. How are you?
Good morning, Frankie. It's great to be here. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Good.
I want to ask you about that clip in a second, but first I want to invite folks to join the conversation, 888-720-9677. Maybe you got a question for Thomas. Maybe you're holding to ask our panel a question. Maybe you got something for me. Maybe you want to look to something about the results. Give us a call. We'll try to help you out. Tom, Elicker in that speech, what is he touting in terms of his successes?
Yeah, so as you played, Elicker has been touting and really running all year on his record over the past 4 years of leading the city. He has spoken a lot on the campaign trail about leading the city through the COVID-19 pandemic, about securing a significant bump in city funding from Yale and the state, about launching the non-cop crisis response team Compass that's supposed to respond to certain 911 calls related to substance abuse and mental health, expanding Tweed Airport, and then a lot about housing. Housing was one of the most important issues in this campaign, one really pushed by challenger Liam Brennan. And I'd say on the housing front, the incumbent Mayor Elicker spoke about adopting an inclusionary zoning ordinance, increasing fines on the kind of largest corporate landlords, and supporting tenants unions around town. Those are some of the things that he's been touting. And as we saw yesterday, he won pretty definitively in quite a low turnout primary election.
I'm so glad you talked about housing, because I have to tell you, now that I have you on the line, I've said this without you guys on the phone, there probably isn't a publication in the country that covers evictions and housing rights like the New Haven Independent does. So make sure you follow what Thomas and the rest of the crew, I can't speak today, the rest of the crew at the New Haven Independent is doing regarding that. Hey, Tom.
Thank you, Frankie.
No problem. Were you or your colleagues able to talk with voters yesterday? I want to know what they're saying about the successes Elicker is touting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my favorite part of election day, any election day,
Yes,
is sprinting all around town, different polling places, talking to voters about who they are, why they're out there at the polls, how they're feeling about the race. And, there's still a couple hundred absentee ballots left at least for our team to account for. But at least with the machine votes and the first 150 absentee ballots accounted for, around 7,500 people voted in yesterday's Democratic primary. It's probably going to be around 20%, 21% turnout. And in a city where Democrats outnumber registered Republicans around 15-1, this really is the race to watch. I'd say at the polls, there was Comfort with how the city is going right now. Not a lot of people saying that they, I ever, there were four Democrats vying for the nomination for mayor for much of this race, and some political wisdom I heard from a longtime New Havener was that rarely is an incumbent voted out because the electorate likes a new person more. It's usually because they really don't like the person in office. And I think Justin Elicker is nowhere near that level of dislike among New Haven Democrats. I think a lot of Democrats respect his very hard work, respect the coalitions that he has built over the years, especially not most recently with the kind of Yale Unite Here unions. And I think that people seem pretty happy overall with the trajectory of the city. What I heard the most at the polls were actually interest in the ward by ward alder races. There were 6 contested alder races in the 30 wards in New Haven last night, which is one of the most number of contested races that I've seen in recent memory in New Haven politics, maybe in a decade. And so a lot of people wanted to talk about their particular alder race and also the kind of bread and butter neighborhood issues, speeding on major corridors, bike lanes, lack of affordable housing, blight on particular blocks, and then also always, people who really cherish how hard won the right to vote is for so many communities in this country. And some of my favorite interviews talking with a woman like Barbara Dozier from Liberty Street in the Hill, who went out because she had at front of mind her enslaved great grandfather from South Carolina and her disenfranchised Cherokee grandmother, also from the South, and she makes sure to vote in every election she can because she knows not to take this for granted.
Shout out to Barbara. Shout out to Liberty Street. Shout out to the people of New Haven, because it sounds like there was outstanding participation compared to the rest of the state. If you're saying 20%, that sounds like a pretty decent number compared to what we saw in the rest of the state. Hey, Elicker wins this primary against legal aid attorney Liam Brennan. What does Brennan do now, and or what? Excuse me. What? Tell us a little bit more about his vocation, and what did he have to offer for the city?
Yeah, so Liam Brennan is a former federal prosecutor, ran a statewide legal services organization for veterans, worked for New Haven Legal Aid and Hartford Inspector General. Has been very involved in kind of New Haven, kind of grassroots organizing around education and housing for a number of years. This is his first run for local office, and he really centered his campaign around housing, and in particular on advocating for overhauling New Haven's zoning code to make it easier to build lots more housing, with the understanding that with more supply of housing of all different types in the market, that will reduce the cost and will free up space and attention for city government to really crack down on enforcing the housing code on some of the most problematic properties in the city. So I think housing he really put at the center of his campaign, and also really pushing the current administration and local government in general to act quickly and with a clear purpose. I mean, I think that's what he was really hitting the mayor on the most towards the end of the campaign. Of course, he and the mayor had nothing but nice things to say about one another after the vote was called. But he really challenged the current administration to have more clearly defined goals for what the city wants to accomplish, and then outline how the city gets there. So I think that he's 30% for a first time in terms of the number of votes that Brennan got yesterday. Certainly a respectable amount for a first time candidate, and I think that the push that he has left is the imperative of building more housing to address the affordability crisis, and then having clearly defined goals, and then working towards them in a way that people have faith that local government can actually get things done. Are just kind of two legacies of this campaign.
Is Brennan going to try to get on the ballot in November, do you think?
No, he's not. He said publicly he was vying for the Democratic nomination, and then if he wasn't going to get that, he wasn't going to run in November. So he won't be running in November.
Who is?
So Tom Goldenberg, who's an ex-McKinsey consultant, grew up in West Haven, been in New Haven for a number of years. He has secured the Republican Party nomination and also the Independent Party nomination. So he'll be on the ballot on those two lines in November. And then at least one, maybe two unaffiliated candidates who can run in in most elections, Wendy Hamilton and Macy Torres might have their names on the ballot as well. But the two kind of major party nominees will be Justin Elicker, the Democratic Party and Working Families Party candidate, and then Tom Goldenberg, the Republican and Independent Party.
It's like NBA All-Star Weekend right now, where Thomas Breen is unconscious in the three-point shooting contest and is just knocking them down from three right now. I appreciate it. I'm interested to hear more about this political dynamic in New Haven, but we have to leave it here for now. Thank you so much, Tom, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Frankie. Great to be with you.
That was Tom Breen, the editor of the New Haven Independent. Looking forward to having him on again when we talk about New Haven politics next time. From the Elm City to the capital city, where Democratic voters paved the way for Arunan Arulampalam to be their new mayor. Arulampalam is a 37-year-old who's never held elected office. He's the CEO of the Hartford Land Bank. I was there last night at Duncan Park in Hartford when Arulampalam claimed victory. He spoke at a podium in the Yard Goats ballpark. He was flanked by family. His parents were there too. They gave birth to Arunan in Zimbabwe after fleeing from Sri Lanka. Arulampalam recalled speaking to them when he was a kid about being a politician.
You guys said, look, no one is going to vote for someone with the last name Arulampalam. It doesn't fit on the lawn sign. Well, look, tonight, a few thousand people voted for someone with the last name Arulampalam, and I'm the Democratic nominee for mayor of Hartford.
While they quip about Arulampalam fitting on a lawn sign, Arunan definitely fits on a shirt, as we saw a lot of green shirts that said Arunan on it at the party yesterday. A three-way primary in the heavily Democratic city. Arulampalam beat State Senator John Fonfara and retired Judge Eric Coleman. Connecticut Public's Ray Hardman heard from Coleman last night at the Phoenix Society at Hartford. The 72-year-old was talking about people criticizing his age.
If we were talking about boxing, I would be the first to say I'm too old. I can't box. But we're talking about being the mayor of the city of Hartford, which in my estimation requires leadership, it requires experience, it requires wisdom.
Arulampalam expected to be Hartford's next mayor. He can make it official in November when he meets an endorsed Republican candidate and several petitioning candidates. Hey, I got to make a note for transparency. Arunan Arulampalam's father-in-law is Gregory B. Butler, who's a member of the Board of Trustees here at Connecticut Public. From Connecticut Public, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're going to talk more about Hartford later, but coming up after the break, another big primary in another big city. We're going to visit with my colleague at Connecticut Public, Kate Seltzer, who saw an incumbent eke out a close one in Bridgeport. More with Kate in a moment. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677. We want your phone calls, 888-720-9677. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Hey, Joe Ganem's been the mayor of Bridgeport for 8 years. Well, that's just the second term. His first one lasted 12 years before he would spend 7 years in federal prison for corruption and extortion charges stemming from his time in office. So 20 total, and it looks like it'll be 4 more years. Ganem won a close one last night, but again, the victory comes with questions about absentee ballots making the difference. My next guest is someone who's been following politics in Bridgeport just very closely this past year. Joining us now on Zoom is Kate Seltzer, the Howard Center for Investigative Reporting Fellow for Connecticut Public's Accountability Project. How are you, Kate?
Good morning, Frankie. I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to talk to you about Bridgeport. A lot developing there. I want to, first of all, I want to invite people to call us if they want, 888-720-9677. Maybe you got some Bridgeport questions you want to ask us, 888-720-9677. Is this another primary where the challenger is saying they beat Ganem at the polls, but were undone by absentee ballots?
It certainly seems that way. This race, I think, has a lot of parallels to what we saw in 2019. Of course, some of the absentee ballots in that race have been challenged, and there's an ongoing, possible criminal recommendation to some of the people who were dealing with absentee ballots in that election. John Gomes has not conceded the election yet, or he had not as of late last night, early this morning. He called the election stolen, and he said that evidence will emerge that there was, untoward voting happening by absentee ballots.
Hey, why is that basically it? 2019, or there are more issues in the past? Is that why absentee ballots are kind of a big controversial thing in Bridgeport?
Well, there's actually a pretty well documented history of absentee ballot misconduct in Bridgeport dating back to the 80s. There have been a handful of significant fines and discipline from the State Elections Commission as we're looking at absentee ballots in Bridgeport. So there's certainly a perception that absentee ballot misconduct is happening. Whether it is or it isn't, I think it's probably too early to say for this election cycle, but I think people certainly feel that way.
I want to mention somebody you talked to yesterday. You talked to a voter yesterday named Sean Kiernan, someone who supported Ganim despite this past criminal record that I mentioned earlier. Why do you think Ganim resonates with people like Kiernan?
Well, I think that there are some people who empathize with Ganim as somebody who's been to prison, people who have been to prison themselves, people who have loved ones who have been to prison. And the idea that Joe Ganim is willing to give those people a second chance, and that perhaps the city of Bridgeport owes him a second chance in the same way. I think voters like Kiernan definitely were interested in, particularly in issues like the economy. They feel like they are better off, the city is better off with Ganim at the helm than they were previously.
What were people yesterday in Bridgeport telling you about Ganim as you were at this victory kind of party?
Well, at the polls yesterday, there were definitely mixed results. There were people who were excited to vote for Joe Ganim yet again. There were people who were definitely ready for change. As you mentioned, he's coming up on 20 years of being mayor of Bridgeport. I believe the record for that is 24 years. It's held by Jasper McLeavy, who was Bridgeport's socialist mayor in sort of the mid 20th century. I think there is some sense that it's time for a change. People were particularly passionate about issues like education and housing and felt like not enough had been done under Ganim's tenure to improve those issues. But there were also certainly people, especially last night at the victory party, who were very, very excited to hear those results come in.
I want to hear what Ganim had to say last night after a long day.
Let's reorganize. Let's make sure we're focused on what's critically important. Between now and November, we got to do our job to make sure the next 4 years we do it for the people of the city of Bridgeport.
Kind of tight on time, so I won't get you to react necessarily to that clip. I want to talk now about his opponent, who might say, not so fast, Joe. John Gomes, Ganim's former colleague, wasn't satisfied with the results, huh, Kate?
Yeah, that's right. He certainly believes that the election was stolen, and he has yet to concede that race. I think, we'll sort of see what comes out of that in the next couple of days. But it is worth noting that John Gomes will appear on the general ballot, regardless of the outcome, if he decides to challenge that primary result or not. He was endorsed by the Independent Party and has qualified to appear on the general ballot. So the race isn't over. Anybody else on that ballot in November? Yes, Lamont Daniels is running as an unaffiliated candidate. He has qualified. I think, we could expect an announcement from his campaign in the coming days. But that was the most recent update. And then Marilyn Moore may or may not run as a write-in candidate, although she will not appear on the ballot. And then Republican Dave Hers will also be on the ballot in November.
Kate Seltzer's first time on the Wheelhouse, absolutely crushed it. Been crushing what's happening in Bridgeport as well. Something to watch in the coming days is how the Gomes team reacts to what they thought happened yesterday in Bridgeport. Thank you, Kate Seltzer. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
The race in Bridgeport may not necessarily be over. I wanted to talk about the Derby race. We're going to wait a little bit to talk about that. I'm now going to zoom in on what happened in West Haven yesterday with Kay Perkins, who is a colleague of mine at Connecticut Public. How are you, Kay?
I'm great. How are you, Frankie?
I'm doing well. Hey, you weren't just at one event talking to Paige Weinstein, who was the endorsed candidate. You were at two. So we didn't necessarily have a result in one of the races that we were talking about in Derby, but the Republican primary in West Haven was decisive, and it was a stunner. I just said that Weinstein was the party's endorsed candidate. She didn't get the nomination. Instead, Barry Lee Cohen got the nod from West Haven Republican voters.
This is a referendum on change for the better. But that new change has to have the experience, and it has to be, you have to hit the ground running.
Kay, what change is Cohen talking about in that clip?
Yeah, well, West Haven has been embroiled in scandal for the past couple of years, ever since a city official under Democrat Mayor Nancy Rossi, a city official, was convicted of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars in COVID relief money. And she's stepping down. And I think Barry Cohen is also talking about sort of just 20, 30 years of Democratic leadership and how he feels that it hasn't been good for West Haven.
What about Weinstein? You were at two races, as I mentioned yesterday, or two parties. Has she said anything about the results yet?
Yeah, so I showed up at Weinstein's event, and a couple minutes later, she conceded. She said that she accepted the results. She has kind of touted herself as the only candidate without city ties to City Hall. And she sort of admitted that the people of West Haven do want somebody with a little bit more experience. Cohen was a city councilman. He also has been on the board of several municipal organizations, and he is touted his own experience. You heard him talking about that in that clip. She accepted the results of the election, and she admitted that the people of West Haven want somebody with a little more experience.
Dorinda Boer also going to be on that ballot in November, as she is the Democrat endorsed candidate. Kay Perkins, thank you so much for coming on, obviously for going to two events as well and getting us that clip. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to the rest of my Connecticut Public colleagues who were all over the place yesterday covering this stuff. Go to ctpublic.org for more of the information on the show. I mentioned that the race in Bridgeport may not necessarily be over. We know the primary in Derby is definitely not over. There will be a recount. Gino DiGiovanni Jr. did have more votes. The Republican-endorsed candidate appeared to top incumbent Mayor Richard Zekin in the Republican primary, but he didn't win by enough. We had Eddie Martinez there yesterday. He caught up with Gino DiGiovanni Jr. last night, and here's what the Derby alderman had to say.
People ask me, do you have any regrets of going that day and this and that? And, that is so hard for me to answer. If it was just substantially on that day, well, maybe, but.
Lots to follow in the upcoming days and weeks. We're going to be talking about the recount and more of the primaries and, of course, the general. So stay tuned to ctpublic.org. We have a tremendous panel coming up. I can already see Susan Raff and Dan Haar, who are ready to talk to us about yesterday's developments. And we got Jonathan Wharton on Zoom. 888-720-9677, the number to call if you got a question for us. You're in the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Hey, we whipped around the state to begin the show. We wanted to give you a fast-paced recap of what happened yesterday in primaries that took place across Connecticut, but now it's time to drill down. And with the help of our next guest, we're going to hone in on what about these races matter. Joining me now in studio, right across from me, Susan Raff, WFSB News Channel 3. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning on this cloudy day.
Yeah, a cloudy day, but I'm feeling good because I got you guys in studio. Dan Hard to my left, CTinsider.com, senior columnist as well.
Good morning. The sun is shining in the studio here.
Not as bright as your peach shirt or my pink shirt that we're wearing.
There you go. We're out overwhelming the place.
And whatever this peach concoction is that Dan has in this glass jar, that matches his shirt.
I love setting the scene. You can't see it. It's like a mason, or no, it's actually a ball jar with. It looks like chocolate milk to me from this angle, but
it used to look like whiskey, but I put milk in it today.
And super jealous right now on Zoom is Jonathan Wharton, the preppy prof, the associate professor of political science and urban affairs at Southern Connecticut State University. Good morning, preppy one.
I am indeed very jealous. Susan and Dan, I wish I could be in the studio with you, so forgive me. It's pouring rain down here in New Haven.
Well, next time.
Yeah, a lot to be excited if you're down in that area. Not at the abode in Brantford, but I guess in downtown New Haven, right?
Oh yeah, it's just very muggy. It feels like Florida out there.
Join the conversation if you want to talk to us. 888-720-9677. We'll take your questions and we'll take your phone calls. Hey guys, we blazed through New Haven, Hartford, Bridgeport, Derby, and West Haven in our opening segments. Would any of you point to another big race that maybe we didn't get to yet?
I think Middletown would be something. There were some big wins, obviously, in New Haven for current Mayor Justin Elicker. I think he took all 30 wards, districts in the city. I think he got 70% of the vote. And also Middletown, Mayor Ben Florsheim, who was, I think, at one time was the youngest mayor in Middletown's history to take that position in 2019, I think. And in any event, he was challenged by a very young man, 24 years old, Ed Ford Jr., who actually, I will admit, went to high school with my son. And he waged a good campaign, but ultimately there were big wins there, a lot of volunteers. So those candidates are feeling happy today.
Middletown press says that it was 22-18 to 482, a landslide. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I wouldn't call it necessarily a big race, but notable and something I was watching. The town of Brookfield, which gave us Governor Jody Rell, just barely a Republican, a very moderate Republican. I shouldn't say barely. She's a good Republican. Tara Carr, the MAGA-ish incumbent first selectman, beat back a sort of more very conservative, but not MAGA, sort of a more established Republican Matt Grimes in that town. Just a few hundred votes. Good turnout, not bad turnout. But that tells you, combined with Derby, that MAGA is not absent in Connecticut. And it's just a little sample, but it's notable.
But maybe more hyper-local than anything. I think there was 5 or 6 Republican primaries in the state yesterday. And Brookfield and Derby, as we see, have those candidates.
That's right.
And if you look at Derby, for example, and I was thinking about that this morning, something like being charged federally for taking part in riots at the nation's capital several years ago, that would have been, I don't know if I could vote for that person. But I think today it's not such a big deal for a lot of people. I don't know if that's a good statement or not, but it wasn't enough, certainly, to keep that candidate, DiGiovanni, down.
Tara Carr was at the anti-vaccine rally before the COVID vaccine. It was the February of the famous 4,000 people at the Capitol, February of 2020. That was the rally to make sure vaccinations are optional. And that was, that's a pretty strong anti-establishment right-wing position to hold. I'm not saying it's not a legitimate one, but it's something that you don't see in an incumbent necessarily very much in liberal Connecticut.
I think I was there, the kind of rallies that we've all had to cover, but not always looking forward to necessarily. But Jonathan, any race you want to look at in particular that maybe we didn't get to?
Yeah, well, no, I think you
or
all
want to highlight?
The main ones. I think the Derby one, just to kind of add what you all have said, is a quirky one because, he was mayor for quite a while and he's always won narrowly, always narrowly. So it shouldn't be surprising that, there's a difference of 20-something votes there and hence the reason for the recount. And yeah, I'm back with Susan as I was trying to chime in there about Middletown, only because I think that's important because you're seeing kind of more of an internal dynamic among 2 millennial candidates. And, Ed Ford, we can't forget, is a former Republican. So for him to step up and try to do that as primary and somebody who I actually know very well says a lot in terms of what's going on there, too.
Do you think that made a difference for some voters? I mean, clearly, it was a huge win for Florsheim. It wasn't even close. And I know Ed Ford, when he was on the city council, he was a Republican, now changed Democrat. What does that say to voters, that people are willing to change their party just to become attractive?
I think that's a good point, Susan. I think the thing about Middletown is that they've had some internal struggles between both their DTCs and definitely the RTC. So I think Ed wanted to kind of step up and give at least an alternative, to voters. And so I think that was more personal, if not political, there, as opposed to, something more unique.
And if you remember, Dan Drew was also fairly young. So I think Middletown likes young, people in the driver's seat.
I think overall you have to really look at the power of incumbency in this race. And if you count Arunan Arulampalam as the de facto incumbent, he has the backing of the town committee, the endorsement. He has the backing of the implicit backing of the governor. Does
he have the backing of Prospect Avenue?
He definitely has Prospect Avenue. That's just a few blocks from my house. So he did
West
very
End.
well in the West End. Yes, he did very well in the West End.
No, Dan, you're onto something. The West End. Don't forget the turnout form. Did you see those numbers for the West End? I mean, especially as a kid who grew up right on the borderline there between West Hartford and Hartford, I was shocked at the numbers. It was overwhelming for him.
I think what Dan highlights is very true. It's very hard to beat the endorsed candidate. They have the money behind them. They have the machine behind them. I mean, I think Justin Elliker from New Haven told me last night they had 200 volunteers. So, it is easier, certainly, for the endorsed candidate to pull off a victory.
Somebody showed me a ticket while we were at Arulampalam yesterday, and it showed results in the North End, and Coleman just didn't get the separation there that he needed.
Arulampalam was number 1 or 2 in all 24 of the voting districts. And he was very proud of that. He talked about it last night. I should say that when he talked about his name being not pronounceable, that was a reference to a supporter of Judge Coleman, who at the press conference just last week got up in the press conference to no correction from Judge Coleman, said, I'm not going to vote for him. I can't pronounce his name. I want to vote for someone. So that was a direct reference to that racist remark.
And I don't think any of the accusations that were made during that press conference by Coleman and petitioning candidate LeBron about Arulampalam trying to get or solicit donations from people outside the city of Hartford got any traction at all. Because let's face it, it's the capital city. And whether you live there, you work there, you have a business there, the entire state has a vested interest. So I think that went nowhere for Eric Coleman.
Dan, go ahead, Jonathan. Yes, get in there.
Weren't you all intrigued, though, that somebody like Coleman admitted that there was no need for advertising on TV? I mean, I'm sure you all covered and saw that. Right. And yet that seemed to make a difference for the other candidates.
I think it made a huge difference for the other candidates. Yesterday, I was with the Secretary of the State, and a reporter asked about, people don't know about the primary, right? And how do you get people to come out? I mean, Hartford, I think it was 14%.
14%.
That's kind of sad, right?
You said something about that clip. Let's hear it. Stephanie Thomas, the Secretary of the State. Let's hear what she had to say.
A lot of people don't know when a primary is happening. So I just think people respond to the mass advertising you see in presidential elections. It's top of mind for everyone, not so locally.
Look at that. I fed right into the sound that was there. That's fantastic. But it's so true. And I really think it was asked, so should the Secretary of the State's office spend the money to, enlighten, inform people?
No.
They don't have any money. I kind of agree with Dan. I truly believe that certain civic organizations, whether they be African American, Latina, whatever, they should be the ones who should kind of inform people of who's voting and that there's a primary.
I want to move on to New Haven. Go ahead.
Just a couple of fun facts about turnout in Hartford.
Yes.
Turnout. Fact number 1 is that it's going to come out to about $200 per vote. A little under $200 a vote when it's all added up, the primary. So far, it's at about $160 a vote. And that doesn't count labor, which the economy doesn't, free labor, volunteer labor, which the economy doesn't really recognize. And when you include all the volunteer work, it is an unbelievable amount of effort per vote. Second fun fact is that Walter Morton IV in Hamden the losing candidate in Hamden received more votes than Arunan Arulampalam last night. Not by many, but more.
Wow, that's incredible.
something like 5,200 votes in Hartford yesterday?
Yeah, total 52, 53. That's right.
We're going to go to Bridgeport and New Haven in a second. I got to go back to you, Dan, because Arulampalam, assuming that he wins in this heavy Democratic city because primaries usually decide it, he's going to be maybe the only person of color that's a mayor in one of the big cities?
That's right. There are 19 cities in Connecticut. The rest are towns. And there are 3 or 4 people of color, 2 black, of towns, but none of mayors, and so that and Arunan is proud of that fact. He does view it as relevant in diversity, but of course he's not. He's South Asian. He's not of either of the 2 dominant races in Hartford.
Right. Coleman used that in his campaign platform, saying that he's a person of color and that's what the city needs. I think the last one was Carrie Saxon Perry. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. But yeah, I think that the Arunan victory is important for the city. We'll see what happens going forward.
And the last person of color who was a mayor in Hartford was Pedro Sagata, who was Latino.
Yeah, but as a matter of fact, you all noticed there's been almost 20 years since that's happened, that there's not a Latino candidate for mayor. That speaks a lot more towards Latino politics in Hartford.
It was Segarra and then Bronin. I think Bronin became mayor in 2015. Jonathan, you're up. Let's talk about New Haven. I didn't want to drill into this with Tom because I wanted to get to it with you. Before we talk about Elliker, we're going to have Tom Goldenberg, who is the Republican candidate, but this guy's a Democrat, right?
Yeah, I have been following this closely. I even had breakfast with him yesterday, oddly. Yeah.
You guys have a mimosa? What'd you do?
Oh, look at that. No, I wish. But I will say that it's interesting.
Were they bottomless, the mimosas?
He was having some of Dan's chocolate milk. Whatever's in this jar.
Charged.
But his angle is to try to unite, at least, in some kind of coalition among, let's say, disgruntled Democrats and Republicans. And there are so many unaffiliated voters. And so I think he's trying to tap into that kind of frustration, not just so much at Elliker, but just in general with the system here in Connecticut, in New Haven at least, because there's so many Democrats, but there are a lot of unaffiliated voters out there.
888-720-9677, the number to call if you want to join us on the Wheelhouse. We got a great panel. Don't you want to be the 5th person on this panel? Give us a call, 888-720-9677. Back to you, Jonathan, real quick before we get Susan involved, because she was in New Haven as well. Elliker, let's drill in on what happened there. Tom Breen said earlier that it's not necessarily that in New Haven people want to vote for somebody that they like. It's more, or vote against, vote for somebody that they like. It's going to be that if they don't want you to win, they're going to come out and support you. It sounds like Elliker, not, I guess, incredibly disliked in New Haven.
Right. And if you notice, the results were done early. I mean, we knew by at least 8:15, so that shouldn't be too shocking. But we can't forget there were a lot of candidates also trying to run, and some of them obviously could not qualify, to even petition on in the first place for the primary. There are a couple people who attempted to do so, and that was difficult. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is it's a very strong Democratic town committee. I mean, of course, you all know I tried to go up against the machine literally when I attempted to be party chairman there in New Haven, at least for the Republican Party. It's not easy. Add into that, something that's missing here is the union support. That is tremendous. And so Elliker is able to kind of tap into, and it has been since then.
Susan, what was the mood like in New Haven yesterday? Was it a festive atmosphere?
It really was. I think there were a lot of thank yous. I think the night was called pretty early. I think about less than an hour after the polls closed. The Elliker campaign knew that Justin Elliker was the winner, and he came in to the bar, which is in New Haven, and he came out there at 9 o'clock.
Not just a bar, but bar.
Bar. Okay.
A bar.
I have to get rid of the word "the." Apparently, that's not a good word. There.
Pizza. Everybody loves bar pizza.
All right, I had some pizza. It was absolutely delicious.
And they have a brewery there too, Susan. Don't forget that.
That's true. But one of there was a lot of support there from unions. The mayor made a point in his speech to commend them, and his big mantra over the night was, "We do this together. We do this together." He kept saying that over and over, and that energizes people. I think what's also interesting about this race is that he was a class act. He not only just thanked Liam Brennan, he likes Liam Brennan. A lot of the Democrats do. Liam Brennan is a sharp guy, And the mayor said that he would like to have him in his campaign or his administration in some form. And I think that was genuine. And Liam Brennan told me last night it would be something that he would like to, think about.
I think that something that was interesting about that race was that Liam Brennan brought environmental racism to the forefront. Google Liam Brennan's comments on that, and you'll find out some information down there in New Haven. 888-720-9677. I'm seeing Susan gesturing to me. Get in there. Go ahead.
Right. I just want to point this out because, people may not know who Liam Brennan is, but, he was a key factor in bringing down Governor John Rowland during that trial. He and Chris Maddy. I was in that courtroom, and unbelievable. So he's very well respected and liked.
I think you have to ask why, Jonathan, to your point about politics in New Haven, why is it, and organizing, why is it that the Democratic primary is two young-ish and young white Yale graduate school graduates, one an MBA, one a lawyer, who live respectively in the two richest neighborhoods in the city?
And is that why there's high turnout in New Haven? Is it a lot of Yaleys voting too?
Yeah, if you look at those wards, especially in East Rock, they do turn out, right? And historically, it's been that way for years. So it shouldn't be so surprising that you get the candidates that do show up, and you do get that voter base. But a lot of this is also personality-led. And so once you're able to kind of seal that along with the union support, right, that is tremendous for you to get your name recognition out there.
We got to go to Bridgeport, where there is more controversy. And normally I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole, but the election is over with. So I want to address a little controversy. We had first this situation where Gomes was condemning the city council member that they said was harassing poll workers there. And then the Ganim campaign responded by saying that they sent this email that said that shockwaves were reverberating through the Ganim 23 campaign, saying that somebody was breaking and entering into a senior citizen's home to alter their ballot or something like that. Then you have the absentee ballot issue. A lot of drama in Bridgeport, guys. How do we deal with it?
So much drama. I remember even 4 years ago when Mayor Ganim was seeking another term. And there he was at Testa's in Bridgeport, standing on the stage. And who had his arm around his son was former Senator Ernie Newton, who spent time in prison. So I think, it was said here on your show this morning that, this is the city of second chances. People understand that. And that doesn't seem to hurt or affect Joe Ganim at all.
The disappointment for John Gomes is that I think a lot of people thought, at last there is a person who is not necessarily well known, but well organized in the city and who knows the tricks. The tricks are, it's not that secretive here. It's absentee ballots, absentee ballots, absentee ballots. So we thought that the absentee ballot count was going to be closer. It turned out to be, 3-1? Not as much as it was, not quite as much of the ratio as it was against Senator Marilyn Moore. But that was something that was a bit of a disappointment, I think, for those challengers that wanted to
Jonathan, 4,300 absentee ballots, I guess, handed out in Bridgeport. And as of 3 o'clock, our TAP team here at Connecticut Public told us that 2,800 had already been handed back. So why is there so much interest in absentee ballots in Bridgeport as compared to maybe other places? Hartford, I guess, was the next closest with 1,000 ballots handed out.
Yeah, no, and I'm grateful that I got tipped about this last week, as a matter of fact. So kudos to Brian Lockhart. He reached out to me last week and said, "Isn't this an anomaly?" I said, "This is really unusual to see that big of a number." And so that's obviously something that Joe Ganim's camp has done, and it's something that they rely on. One other factor we need to keep in mind in Bridgeport, similar to New Haven, you have multiple candidates trying to get on that ballot, and so we saw that kind of flesh out with Daniels and Moore, and so many people trying to run in the first place and getting that endorsement from their local Democratic town committee.
And Ganim is particularly good at getting those absentee ballots.
Oh, yeah. And getting them back.
Is that the machine? Is that the Mario Testa machine right there in work? I see a big smile.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Absolutely. And look, that gets to the heart of what you were bringing out, Frankie, before. I know you and I have spoken about this before, and even Dan, too, is that these local, Democratic town committees, they have certainly longtime leaders on them who've been the ones who've been successful in supporting their candidates.
And if you look at in Hartford, too, I think Senator John Fonfara, though he clearly did not win the primary, he got more absentee ballots. So his campaign focused a lot on that.
I think with Joe Ganim, you have to remember it's not just politics and it's not just the second chances. He does do a good job of keeping coalitions together in that city.
Is he going to have any challenge in November, do you think? Is there going to be anybody that goes on him? We heard Dan Hurst is going to be on the ballot, Lamont Daniels, maybe John Gomes.
Nothing notable. There's no chance he's going to lose, just as in Hartford.
And the Bridgeport race, I think, compared to a lot of the other races, was probably the most hostile and ugly, right? Because, you have to realize John Gomes was fired by Joe Ganim and then ran against him. So it was pretty ugly.
Or he was fired because he ran against him. He fired. Yes. It's like in Wall Street, fire on the rumor.
With the support of, remember, the people who are anti-Democratic Town Committee. Don't forget that. A lot of the money from outside Bridgeport who are supporting his efforts to step up.
Don't got a lot of time, so I want to get through these next couple of things quickly. We mentioned this earlier. We had Brookfield and Derby that had the so-called MAGA candidates. We see how big these primaries are in the cities. Can we learn anything about politics in these primaries, or is it like my good friend Mark Pazniokas says, where it's all extremely hyper-local and it really doesn't matter to the bigger picture?
It is all hyper-local. The one point that you can make about incumbent power in this election is the money from COVID, post-COVID, and other factors, especially the Lamont policies of sending more money to the towns, has generally kept tax increases down, and in some places taxes have gone down. And that made it much, much harder for challengers.
And our cities, let's face it, are strongly Democratic. And when you have endorsed candidates and you have current mayors campaigning for you, Governor Lamont was out last night, right? And the money comes in. So I think many of the cities, you have pockets where you're going to see maybe some GOP support. But I think primarily you're going to still see Connecticut cities be Democrat.
Well, ultimately, I think one thing I've been stressing over and over again is a matter of having a viable, multiple party system where it's not monopoly by one party, no matter whether it's in the valley or whether it's in the cities. You need to have at least a viability of, at least two parties to make sure you get the turnout that you need.
I'm going to start going like rapid fire here because we only got a few minutes left. But how do you get on the ballot in November? Somebody help me out with that really quickly.
Your petition, you have to get a certain amount of signatures, I believe, to get on. And I heard this morning, I think that Coleman has enough signatures qualified to get on. Whether he takes the plunge, maybe not.
It's too late now to qualify, but if they qualified by the deadline, they could have gotten on the ballot, and he does have the option to be on the ballot.
All right, I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to help us go forward into November. Susan, you want to start? Give me something to watch. Are we looking at maybe Danbury or Fairfield? Maybe a school board thing? Give me something to look forward to.
You're putting me on the
spot
here.
Or one of these city ones.
Yeah, I don't know. I think what we're seeing in the primary will probably be a very similar situation in November. I think, obviously Arunin and others, they will go on to victory.
It appears that we will still have almost all white mayors in Hartford. That's something to watch. The other thing to watch is
you're saying in all the cities.
In the 19 cities. The other thing to watch is the governor's election in 2020. Oh, wait, 6? Is that right? 6?
Yeah, some saying that maybe that's why Bronin was at our Lampolan's party yesterday.
That's exactly right. So you watch
we'll
who's
see
lining
Bronin
up.
Again.
Right.
Jonathan, go ahead. Give me something to look forward to.
Or for Congress, you all. Don't forget. Don't knock him out of Congress. I think there's a possibility you consider running for Congress for Bronin. But I do want to put my emphasis on Bridgeport. I think we're not done with Bridgeport yet. When are we ever done with Bridgeport?
Well, it gives us something to talk about.
What a tremendous panel that we had. Thank you to Susan Raff, Dan Hart, Jonathan Wharton. I am so lucky to have you guys as friends and have you on the show. Thank you so much. Before we go, I got to tell you about an event happening on September 20th at 6 p.m. in Newtown. You can meet me, several of my Connecticut Public talk show hosts at Aquila's Nest Vineyards. Tell us what stories you want to hear on our shows. Mix and mingle with us. Visit ctpublic.org/vineyard to purchase tickets. Great show today. Today's show was produced by Meg Dalton. Thank you so much for your help today. Our technical producer, Kat Pester. Tess Terrible, Katie Tolarski helped us out in the studio. Thank you. Thank you to all my Connecticut Public colleagues for getting us some great clips and election results. Go to ctpublic.org for more information. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.